What's happening?
Dick, how are you, sir?
Good. How are you guys?
Good. Good. Thanks for doing this.
Happy to.
I've watched like every interview and podcast I could find of yours over the course of the last
Jesus.
yeah, no, it's a lot. You're like there was a while there you were like a professional talking head while being a CEO, and you end up getting a lot of content out of that.
I would be afraid to go back and watch any of that.
There's 2 hours and 20 minutes of you and Sarah Lacey talking to one another. And that led me down a rabbit hole of like what happened to Sarah Lacey. Like once upon a time, it seems like she just kind of checked out.
I'm not sure. I haven't spoken to her in forever.
She used the term shit show to describe Twitter to you quite a few times. And you were very noble in the entirety of the interview, just kind of passing on that. But she does it with a smile and like good natured laughter. But I mean, this is July 8th of 2014. So we're really going way back.
It's always been everybody's favorite company to trash.
I feel like there's two requisites of what I found in any conversation that people seem to have with you of any length. It's one, you're actually, I don't know if you know this, but before I sent across the invite to schedule, you actually have to ask about Second City and improv and all that, and like Rachel Dratch and what's Steve Carell like. Like it was in the terms of service of you coming on. So that's like one, and then two, you have to like kind of throw some negative shade at Twitter as a product. It's like you have to do both.
When I took over as CEO in October 2010, we had already been the Twitter logo, the bird had already been executed on the cover of two magazines. This is 12 years ago, 2010. I think it was Business 2.0 and like Fast Company. It was hanging itself on Business 2.0 and it exploded on Fast Company or something. And, the death of Twitter. It's funny, it's just crazy. It's always been like that. That was before I took over.
I kind of want to know what, like, in your opinion, why all that's the case. But my first and most important question, what was the closest you actually ever came to deleting your first tweet? Like there had to have been one moment in there, because everyone brings that up as well, right? Every single time.
I just always thought like all that stuff's already out there, who cares?
It seems to boomerang back around, though, every time Twitter makes the news for some way. Like, after Parag takes over, it boomerangs back around, and then Elon Musk.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I was like searching for my name, and I typed it into the search, a UI. The first web UI this is like 2007, I think. The first web UI was like, oh, that's not the search box. That's the tweet box. Well, whatever. Of course.
Yeah.
14 years later, it's like, how come you didn't? It's like, well, it was very different back then. Anyway, what are you going to do? You can't, it doesn't matter, who cares?
You actually don't even need to set alerts if like something's happening with Twitter. Like you just know that tweet's going viral again. It's like, oh, great. What's going on with the company? That thing's recirculating at this point.
I live most of the time in Napa now. I moved up here during the pandemic. I woke up the morning that the first Elon news came out. And I looked at my phone and it just had my I always clear my messages. I had like 49 text messages. And I just immediately knew like, something happened. Something happened to Twitter.
You're like, someone died or
something happened to Twitter.
Yeah, exactly.
One of those two things. Or somebody, yeah, it's exactly right.
Well, I guess someone dying, you probably get like one text or like a call me text.
Yeah, call me. One call me text. No, I knew it was. Something happened.
Yeah. Well, I'll try not to ask you I want to play back some of the more, I don't know, different, interesting stuff, but I appreciate you doing this and Adam nudging this along. I guess maybe to level set, can you just give a quick primer on your background? Even though I've heard it from every podcast interview you've ever done over the last 2 weeks, so I could probably do it, but maybe from your words, it might be better.
Sure. I born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. Family is all automobile industry folks. Dad, grandfather, cousins, etc. Went to University of Michigan, studied computer science, and graduated with a CS degree. Decided that I didn't want to take any of the job offers. I had to go be a programmer. And I went to Chicago and I started hanging out and going through the Second City Training Center and then performing at Second City because I wanted to get on Saturday Night Live. I actually showed up, as you will have heard from other interviews. I showed up at Second City the same day Steve Carell did. So Steve and I went through the whole training center together and performed when we first started out performed there together in the same group.
Could you tell, by the way, with Carell at that point, like, could you tell he had a star quality?
Yes, but. So the yes, but is, I became friends with, a bunch of those folks who were all there at the same time. Rachel Dratch, Adam McKay, who went on to direct a bunch of the Will Ferrell movies and The Big Short. Yeah. All those people were there. And it was, it was amazing. You Operate Citizens Brigade was formed at the time. So, Amy Poehler was there and all those guys and Tina Fey was there at the same time. It was just amazing. So you could tell that he was great. I mean, he was always a great improviser. He and Tina were like remarkable improvisers, but the big but is there were a number of people there who were world-class good. And you always thought, man, this person's going to be like straight to SNL and films and everything else. And I would say that the people who, all of us thought were maybe the funniest, are people who didn't make it for one reason or another. Either they did they auditioned for SNL and they're like, we already have a fat guy, or we already have the straight guy. We already have Will Ferrell who plays the, straight guy or whatever. So just all sorts of random reasons, Steve auditioned for SNL a couple of times and didn't get it. He ended up going and kind of grinding and got the Dana Carvey show, but then that got canceled and was a roving reporter on the Daily Show, and then finally got Judd Apatow cast him in 40-Year-Old Virgin, and then it was off to the races. He got The Office after that.
Has that informed a little bit of like your perspective to investing now? Just like you see this randomness associated with greatness, and like Carell had to grind. I always think about like George Clooney, and breaking through at like 42 or something, and the lack of linearity in the acting world of careers where you're like John Hamm, and it's like, I'm this handsome, charismatic, good actor who at 38 like has nothing to show for it, right? It's this very weird lack of linearity in profession. I think it would drive me insane. But did that actually inform like your investing mindset that like, hey, even if all this talent aligns, you still actually have to get really lucky with things?
I think it's informed more than just my investing mindset. It informed my mindset about everything. Like, it informed my mindset about the fact that when you're like the CEO of a major company and you're in the news every day and, and whatever says you're, Vanity Fair puts you as, you're number 8 on whatever list, like it informs like, hey man, this could be anybody. Like this is randomly me. It could be anybody. I am lucky to be here. Just gotta, keep my head down and keep going. And so I never got too wrapped around the axle on any of that stuff, just because it informed the fact that, man, like it's just you need to be working hard and you need to be doing everything you need to do, but then you also need to be a little bit lucky. So that always helped keep me grounded, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, Second City, for people that don't know it, I guess I sort of grew up in watching the Bill Murrays or the Chris Farleys or Tina Fey's as well, of the world from a comedy standpoint, but it's brought through so much talent in SNL specifically, improv that broad, right? Was there some formula or like structure to it? Obviously there's these compounding network effects that exist with something when it becomes a brand like that, like SNL has, like Sequoia Capital has, right? Or whatever it is. But like, or was there anything unique to it?
No, the impact that it had was everyone knew it was kind of a little bit, it was, you couldn't really yet use the Groundlings as an on-ramp to SNL at the time I was there. It wasn't really a big deal yet in LA. So Second City, which is, for people who don't know it, this famous improv comedy theater in Chicago, was the place to go, So Dratch and Tina came in from the East Coast. There were people who came in from the West Coast. Lots and lots of people from Big Ten schools ended up coming there. Steve, I think, had gone to college at Denison, went right there. So anyone who was trying to work their way onto SNL who wasn't doing stand-up, and, this is like, again, it's improv theater, not stand-up, came to Second City, just because they all knew this is the path to get to SNL, and this is where SNL will cast most of its cast from, and they did.
Got it. Was there, so there are all those precedents of John Candy. I mean, I guess Candy wasn't on SNL, but Chris Farley and Belushi and Bill Murray and all those guys, I think we're all SNL people.
Yep. They were all Second City.
And they were all Second City as well. And then there was that next generation.
Rachel, Tina, Amy Poehler, a bunch of the other UCB founders. Matt Walsh has been quite successful on Veep. Again, Adam McKay, Dave Koechner, who's in Anchorman with that Adam directed as the sportscaster with the cowboy hat. All those people were at Second City at the same time. It was amazing. And, and Carell and lots of Steve Colbert. We were all there at the same time. It was funny because it was like really the second big heyday of Second City. When you're there, you're at the time, you don't think of it. You're not looking around going, this is the heyday of Second City, but it was.
Yeah, it's funny. You calibrate to I'm the lower mid of the pack, right? And it turned out, well, the lower mid of the pack is actually on SNL as well, right? And this whole calibration thing. Was that just a unique moment in time that the stars kind of aligned?
I don't even know. It was just we were just kind of all doing our thing and not really, it's like when you're doing it, you don't really have a sense of these are the funniest people that will ever come through here. You're just you're grinding away and you're all trying to figure it out and make it. I did know when you would see McKay on stage or Carell or Tina, you would just think you would be in the audience, any of the other improvisers in the audience, you'd just be like, wow, that was, I don't know if I would have been able to do that, or I don't know if I would have, been able to come up with that. Just amazing, just genius improvisers, and really always on and always great. When they would come on stage, oh man, this will be pay attention, this will be good.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a handful of friends that you just they have a celebrity star quality to them. And I'm not really sure if they're ever actually going to end up being celebrities or stars in their own right. But you sort of know that when they walk in a room, they just have a presence about them. I think people have always sort of described Bill Clinton as that way, that he sort of just captivates a room. And I can imagine that these people just have to be so quick on their feet. And I guess that's an interesting question. In improv itself, is there any trait that spikes being funny, obviously, but is there anything that you found was uniquely consistent across the people that actually made it?
No. The people who are good improvisers are not planning ahead what they're going to say. They're just literally really in the moment and going with the flow, reacting to whatever's been said. And they're not thinking ahead. They're just saying what comes next to them, and it comes up. But there's nothing you could define as a characteristic you could go learn, or a trait you could train that would teach you to help you be one of them. There were just people and again, talk about, you may or may not know these names. I mean, Eric Hoffman and Jody Lennon, who were also at Second City in the Annoyance Theater, they were another two people who would get on stage and everyone would go, okay, be quiet. Stop, no more side talking. I want to watch this. Because they were just you knew it was going to be one of the funniest things you'd seen that night. And to be able to do that consistently in improv is, crazy hard.
Yeah. It's an interesting analogy, and I've heard you draw this in the past, but not pre-planning thing. If you end up being too scripted, I have my notes. I want us to improv this, but I have my notes up in front of me. So not all of this is from my mind. But if you end up being too scripted, you just, and that's of your career, that's of a conversation with someone else, it sort of loses the element. I remember one time I was doing this and I was well, we can cut and we can break, and let's just try to put the best of it together. And it was so awkward, and it was a total disaster. And so I actually had the guest, we both went and grabbed a beer and we're hey, let's throw all that out. Let's start over here, because of the awkwardness associated with it. But I guess it's a kind of interesting analogy to your career path that I've heard you draw in the past. So you did this for 5 years ish.
A while, 5, 6, 7 years, something like that. Yeah. I had had a few auditions. I just didn't get anything. So it was like, all right, I gotta like go get a real job.
What was the closest you came?
I mean, the closest I came wasn't very close. Had auditions for SNL and Mad TV, which was another sort of sketch comedy, a sketch comedy thing on TV like SNL back in the day in the 90s. Didn't get either of those. You have to get for SNL to get it. After first auditions, they'll call a select few people to New York and do readings on set with cast members in New York, and I didn't make it to that point. And if you did, you had a much better chance of getting cast, obviously. But even if you did, you didn't. It wasn't a guaranteed thing. So I didn't get very far, and after a few of those, I was like, all right, I got to go get a job.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. A lot of famous people came out of Mad TV as well, right? I think Artie Lang and Keegan Michael Key or whatever his name is, and there's a handful of. Yeah, I mean, those are you're pretty modest on. You came close to like two of the iconic things I think out there, but So you were part-timing at you were doing some packing at like a Crate and Barrel or
No, I worked behind the register at Crate and Barrel because I had to have like odd jobs where I could, we would perform at night and then rehearse during the day. So you're like, all right, well, I can't get a full-time job where I work regular hours during the day, and I can't get a full-time job where I work regular hours at night. So I had to have odd jobs. You don't make any money performing I don't know what they make now, but you just didn't make any money. Even if you kind of made it to the main stage at Second City, there are sort of 3 or 4 different casts before you're on the main stage.
And so you're sitting here thinking, I have a CS degree from Michigan.
Like I was working in a coat check room at some club, random hours, and this guy in my graduating class in Michigan like comes in and hands his coat to me and recognizes me, and you could tell it's like, oh man, like what happened? I think he thought I was like a meth addict or something. Like, oh man, things really went south for you. It's only been like 18 months. What happened?
Yeah. What substance did you get into in between here and there?
Yeah. All right.
Was that like okay, I guess it was only 18 months at that point. So was there any moment that you were like, all right, now I got to go, I'm going to go get a real job?
No, it was only after you just didn't have any. I remember just the constant stress of not having money was a drag, but I was just grinding it out, and I thought like, well, I'll just keep it going. But once I auditioned a few times, it didn't get it. I was like, all right, like this was getting ridiculous. I've been here, 6, 7 years. I got to go get a job.
Do you look back with like some nostalgia about that moment in time, and you're like, I didn't know any better. I was just, I was just poor and trying to make it around funny people and all, or is it kind of like, gosh, my life is so much better now. I'm living in Napa and, bouncing back and forth. Which one? Or can you?
No, I don't have any. I've never had that. Like, I don't know. I'm not one of those people who ever was like, God, weren't those were the best years. I never, like, I just don't think that way. I don't think that way about anything. I've always felt like, man, this next year is going to be amazing. And I don't have it, but I also don't have any regrets about it. I mean, it was, crazy. Again, you ended up being there in the heyday of Second City, which we didn't know at the time, but those people were all great and all like so fun to be around.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know I cut you off in the middle, but thanks for going through all that. So you did that. You said, all right, I'm going to go get a real job. You went into consulting for a little while?
I went to Anderson Consulting and worked in their technology services division, which basically means you're not a consultant. You're just working in the headquarters on software.
Got it.
And then the internet took off, and I quit there and started my own company built one of the million web design companies that was doing basically web design for hire and development. And then from there started several companies, one of which was FeedBurner, which we started in 2004, sold that to Google in 2007, worked for Susan Wojcicki on the ads team. Susan, before she was CEO of YouTube, was basically ran all of ads for Google on the product side, and is great. I loved working for her. She's a great executive. She's no nonsense. She's super common sense. She doesn't get emotional about stuff. She's calm, thoughtful. I think she's fantastic.
And she's still running YouTube today, right?
Yeah, she's still CEO of YouTube. I just think she's a super underrated executive and probably doesn't get enough credit for how good she is.
And you dovetailed at that point, your career crossed again with Ev Williams, who you knew in the past.
Yeah, he was at Google where they had sold Blogger with Biz Stone and Jason Goldman and some of those other guys when they were first looking to acquire FeedBurner. So I got reacquainted with him. By the time we actually got to Google, Ev and company had left and started Odeo, a podcasting company, which was just a little bit before its time, obviously. Yeah. And then pivoted to Twitter in 06. And then when I left Google in July of 2009, Ev basically reached out and said, "Hey, would you be interested in coming here for a few weeks when I take parental leave and kind of watching over the fort for a while?" And I said, "Sure." And then before that even started, he called me back and said, "Hey, what if it was more of a full-time COO gig?" And the rest is history.
And so you were COO for a little while, then ultimately a year, and then became CEO, which, whatever has been chronicled more than enough. And then you had 5-year, 5-ish years. Is that right?
5.5. I think it was like 5.5. Yes.
And took the company from 0 in revenue to $2.5 billion.
2.25.
Who's counting?
Well, yeah, we took it from 0 to 2.25 billion in 5.5 years. And that was at a time we were fighting, we were second fiddle to Facebook. It's one thing to go from 0 to a billion that fast and 0 to 2.25 billion that fast. It's another thing to do when you're like, everyone you're trying to sell to is like, well, I can buy those same ads on Facebook for a much better, cost per transaction and cost per click, whatever, cost per interaction. And so it was a grind. That was I had all credit on that stuff to Adam Bain, who I had brought in shortly after I got there as COO to be basically, president of revenue and build out the entire go-to-market team. And Adam's just, Adam was at Fox Interactive in LA, and I shouldn't say nobody, most people in the Valley didn't really know him. And I remember I told Ev and on the board, "Hey, we should hire this guy from Fox." And they were all like, "Fox? What? Like, no, he's great." And he was. So all credit to him on that front.
And now I've heard him described as the nicest person in Silicon Valley. I've heard him referred to.
He gets all the credit for being nice. What he doesn't get enough credit for is he literally knows everybody. You could get off a plane with him in Guinea-Bissau, and the baggage guy would be, "Bain," like, "Hey," you're like, "How the heck?" Like, everywhere you go with him, you're like, "How in the world do you know this person?" But anyway, that's what. It's one of the reasons.
Hey, listen, there's a reason, makes for a good partner now. And when you're investing in companies and all the stuff you're up to today. But before we go there, and I do want to go there, what question that I can't pass on asking as an avid Twitter user as well, like, what do you think makes it a uniquely hard business in a way that, I don't know, Facebook's different, and Instagram's different, and Snapchat's different. It seems to have this uniqueness of like difficulty in scaling and monetization and a bunch of stuff that I think is maybe not entirely unique to Twitter, but kind of has its own challenges. What do you think that is?
We
only have, by the way, I know we only blocked, we need to keep it under a couple hours. So no need, not all of them, the short version of it.
I'm not sure it's so much different. I just think that, it's, you've got everyone who works in media and writes about technology and writes about media, is on the platform talking about technology and talking about the environment we work in on that platform. And social media has the distinct problem of trolling, which hasn't been successfully addressed, and trolling and the amplification of trolls and the ability for trolls to be trolls, which I continue to think is just solving and addressing that more aggressively would go a long way toward tackling. Let's set aside monetization for a second, and I'll come back to that because I think that's important.
Well, on the Twitter side, to give Twitter credit or blame, there's more anonymity on Twitter, and text is the means of communication, which is easier to, I think, troll, right?
Yeah.
Rather than, Instagram comments,
Yeah. I agree. I remember I told Hunter Walk when he was running YouTube product, I was like, why do you guys have, before I was at Twitter, I think, I was like, why do you guys have comments? They're all just horrible on the videos.
Yeah.
Turn them off. They're stupid. Most people are just like this. Most of the comments are just like either first or this is stupid. Why did you do this?
And you're like, what if that was the whole company? That thing.
I remember telling him, you should just turn these off. So the challenge is, I just think that the idea on all these platforms that users should be treated the same. And in fact, the frequently promoted belief that we should treat every user equally, I just think is a naive idea. Like, why should you treat the Washington Post account the same as an account that was created one day ago with an unverified email that doesn't have a phone number attached to it? Like, why should those be treated equally? Like, why should they show up? Why should they both be able to respond? And why should they both be given equal weight in a conversation thread? And the companies are getting better and better about that. Obviously, Twitter's done a much better job about weighting things in search and weighting things in responses and weighting conversations. But they should be also weighted differently in the way you think about whether you're going to suspend some account or not. Like the idea that, well, we're gonna apply these rules equally to every single account just strikes me as like it doesn't work. I remember again the example I think I used this example of Kara Swisher when she was asking me about, like, why don't you just do X? Everyone's always got why don't you guys just do this? And it's some stupid simple thing that they think no one's ever thought of. But I think I might get the specifics about this bit off, but I think ISIS had a journalist in a cage, and they burned him to death, lit him on fire in the cage and burned him to death, and posted those videos and photos of those things to Twitter and YouTube and everyone else. And when I found out about that morning, I was like, all right, well, obviously we should suspend all those accounts. They're like these terrorist accounts. Let's just, if you post that video, or retweet it, you're a terrorist account, delete the account or suspend the account. And then, my general counsel came to me and said, hey, the New York Post is using that as their cover of their, New York Post tomorrow. And they just posted that thing to Twitter. And I was like, oh, right. Well, don't suspend the New York Post account. That's a bad idea. And it was really the day I would remember learning, like, okay, we should really have to stop treating these things as rules you apply equally to everything.
And then people will say, well, just do what's illegal. And it's like, all right, well, a beheading video isn't illegal, right?
The problem there is the rules are different. Everyone says use the First Amendment. Like, Germany doesn't have the First Amendment.
Yeah. First Amendment's a U.S. centric.
Germany has, if you tweet about Nazi stuff and you don't take it down, you're violating the law, and we're going to arrest your people who are working in the Berlin office. So you have to, adhere to the laws in the countries in which you operate. But then you also have to be careful not to, to protect the privacy of your users as much as you can. There would be people in places like Turkey or Pakistan or wherever that would tweet things, anti-government things, and we'd get these requests that were, hey, give us all the information about this user, or we're, going to arrest you if you ever land in, in Pakistan. Then you're like, okay, well, we're not just going to hand over our user information either. So you're constantly battling this, like, all right, well, we need to adhere to the laws in the countries in which we operate, but we're not going to just, kneel down and hand over information to the government of India or the government of Pakistan, but long story short, on the just health of the platform, I just think that all of these companies need to be a lot more aggressive about, hey, we're not going to treat all the accounts equally. And, these things are subjective. And we're just going to have to, have some common sense rules about trolling we're going to remove. And I think it has to be as apolitical as possible. It shouldn't be like, we're going to apply these social justice rules. It should be like, you can't call, if you start swearing at someone or telling them they're, I'm going to kill you or, whatever, like, we're going to delete your account.
I think there's some inherent issues with social media in general, and one of which is like what might make sense in near-term incentives might actually be problematic for the end user.
Of course, 100%.
Right? And then also might not be good business in the long term.
Totally.
Right? Is probably
Notifications are the classic example of that. Like, hey, if we notify people that this thing happened, they'll use the platform more, and that works great right up until they turn notifications off because they want to stop getting alerted about everything that happens on the platform. I mean, there are a bunch of things like that. This is going to work great and drive engagement right up until the point. I mean, you could make an argument that Facebook has been the textbook case of they do everything they can to drive engagement and it's ruined the platform.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of like, you'll manage to what you measure, and wherever those incentives exist, like suddenly that's where the OKRs are going to be managed towards, and then that's the business you're going to build. But so do you think there needs to be like a regulation for some of these businesses as like utilities in some way?
No, because they'll regulate, like, give me an example of like government it's a bad way to go with this. There's the chances that all you have to do is go watch the questions that the House of Representatives and the senators asked of Zuckerberg and Susan Wojcicki and Jack to know that they have absolutely no idea how to regulate these platforms and would do the wrong thing.
No, I agree. I mean, the level of sophistication on some of these questions are obviously tough there, but there are elements I feel like of utility that exists in some way, like when you're starting to litigate who can have access to a Twitter account or who can have access to a Facebook account. I guess the question, I liked your common sense rules and all that. The only question that I have is like, who is the arbiter of common sense, right?
Yeah, I know. I get it. I mean, Facebook in many ways had the genius move of, we're going to punt it to a third-party organization that we put together that also has no idea what they're doing. But at least then I can go, hey, ask those guys. They're the ones that make the rules.
It's great if the senators and Congress, you're like, yeah, you're right. They don't know what they're doing, but then it's not your problem.
I don't know. It's got to be the people. Ultimately, it's the CEO of the company has got to have a team they put together that's making some common sense rules and trying to stay away from the politics of it. I think some of the things have gotten way too, like, as I said, some of the things that people are getting suspended for are a little too like social justice warrior for my taste, but I'm not running the company anymore, so I don't get to make those decisions.
You said two things on the engagement side and then the monetization side. What was the monetization point?
Well, on the monetization side, I just think the company, we bought a data company when I was CEO called Gnip, that has become the data business for Twitter. And that's a great business. It's a great 9-figure business and has grown quite successfully since we bought it. I just think that, were it me, and it's not me, so I don't get to decide. I just would have liked to have, I would like to see it fork out into some, have some different business models on top of, not get rid of advertising on Twitter. I just think it's been very successful, but you would like to have a couple other lines of business by now. I was hopeful back in the day that Fabric, the mobile platform that ended up getting sold to Google, would become this SaaS platform for us and do well and make money. And I think Google's doing pretty well with that now. But the company decided after I left, like, hey, Dick's trying to do too many things. We're going to focus and shut some of these things down. And the market likes that stuff in the near term because it drives profits, and shareholders love that.
Fabric was it was Crashlytics and a few other things, and then
Crashlytics, and then they had Jeff Seibert, who came over and then was the CEO of that and came over and ran Fabric for us. It was basically mobile login, using phone number login so you could use your app to do both. You could use Fabric to do all of the beta testing for your app instead of Test Flight. You could use Fabric to do, hey, we're going to have mobile login using Fabric. We're not going to have to build our own login and identity, and then all the crash analytics stuff as well. So it was a mobile development platform that just made launching a mobile app a lot easier.
Interesting.
And Google still runs it, and it's quite successful, and we have a bunch of portfolio companies that use it.
Yeah. Was there anything you look back on just I know you like looking forward and don't think, but like any one thing that would have done differently or like would have.
Well, I mean, I famously tried to buy Instagram in March of February and March of 2012, and made an offer to Kevin and Mike that they didn't accept. And I was in a hotel in Tokyo and woke up in the morning to the news that Mark had bought it for, I think it was $1 billion, 700 million of Facebook stock and 300 million of cash. I was like, oh man.
Yeah.
Man, I would have gone to JP Morgan, and I think our offer, I'm going to get this wrong because it's a while ago, but I think our offer was like 10% of Twitter, which at the time was $650 million. And I was like, oh man, I would have like called JP Morgan and asked to borrow, $350 million to give you, to match the offer or make it spend more. But they didn't. Mark wisely, I think, knew about the conversations we had with them, and wisely, said, hey, you need to take it or leave it, and the offer expires in this amount of time or something like that, and such that they couldn't go out and shop it. And we didn't get the chance to do that. Obviously, the internet would be a lot different if we had then Instagram, Vine, and Twitter, and that would have been text and video and photos, and that would have been great, but it didn't happen.
What did you see? Because people made fun of Facebook at the time.
The moment they bought it for $1 billion and everyone was making fun of them for buying it for $1 billion, we were all like, oh man, we're like super outflanked right now.
But they had only been a market. How many? I think they had.
I think they had 8 employees. They didn't have an Android app yet. They had 8 employees, but it was just, you can see these things when they start to go. Here's the deal. Kevin is Systrom. Kevin Systrom is an amazing product executive. Might be one of the best. I think he and Evan Spiegel are probably 2 of the best product CEOs. I just think they're both consumer product CEOs. I just think they're both great. Their ability to see the right question to ask and the right problem to address with a solution that they launch is just, I just think there aren't many people like that. And I remember people saying like, oh, it's filters. Anyone can do filters on photos. But it wasn't filters. It was, they've made it easy by just making every photo the same square format, and not having to go deal with camera, all this camera nonsense. They've made it easy for everyone to take beautiful photos and make everything they're doing look amazing. And they've made that a feed, and it's going to be like, of course everyone's going to want to use that. And then it's exactly what happened. Even though it didn't look like it that at the time. When they bought it for $1 billion, we knew they'd gotten it. We knew it was a steal, and we wished we had it and would have borrowed the cash to go make the same offer. It was obvious to us that was going to work, and that Kevin was amazing and could be super successful inside a company.
Yeah, and for people that don't know this was reported contemporaneously. This isn't just pure revisionist history. I think there was a lot of reporting at the time that you guys had this regret. I forget if Nick Bilton covered it in his book or whatever. But even at the time, now it looks like, oh my God, how did that possibly happen? But even then, you guys were like, oh shit.
We knew it, and we were like, oh. I woke up in the hotel in Tokyo. I got the news, and I was like, crestfallen. It's like, oh man, we're gonna really, really, really wish we had that. It wasn't for lack of trying. We were like taking them out to dinner, going and meeting them at this hotel, going back out to dinner again, bringing this board member out to dinner. I just couldn't punch through.
Yeah, well, it's obviously worked out for them where they land, or I guess philosophically, depending on how you think about it, it either worked out or didn't. But it's certainly been very successful within Facebook. Yes. Have you had that lightning in a bottle sort of like insight where you've seen around either something now that's not patently obvious or another company that had come up over the last couple of years that you're like, oh my gosh, this reminds me of that?
Well, I'm talking my own book now, but I'm wearing the T-shirt actually. Saturn. It's a social media platform built around the calendar for high school students. It's a calendar-based social platform, essentially. Like here's my school, here's my schedule, and it matches that to your friends' schedules in the school. And it's an event-based social network, basically.
It goes in at a user level and kind of integrates with your calendar and allows for chat among your friends and like a bunch of stuff at the high school level.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you can imagine it will at some point be open beyond high schools. But the two founders, Dylan and Max, are, they would just remind you of great, they're great. They're great. They're not satisfied with, whatever success they're having. They constantly are thinking about and working toward, how could this be better? How could this grow even more quickly? How can we make it more safe? How can we learn from the mistakes that these other platforms have made in the past and make sure our platform doesn't have this kind of bad behavior on it? And I think they're already doing an amazing job of that. And they remind me of the Collison brothers in the way that the Collison brothers didn't just accept like, well, this is the way it's always been done. Or Patrick's like, well, who cares? That's not the way. That doesn't mean it's the right way to do it. So they've got that great, like, well, what do you mean? Why do lawyers tell you have to do it that way? I don't want to do it that way. So they've got that just great curiosity about, and they might end. One of the things that people who do that do is they inevitably try to go reinvent HR, and then after like a year, they find that it wasn't worth going and trying to reinvent HR. But great, like going and trying to reinvent stuff that's broken is a smart thing to do, and some of it will work and some of it won't, but that's fine. So these guys, Max and Dylan, remind me of the Collison brothers in that way.
You just tripled their next round, by the way. That's like, what is it in Step Brothers where it's like Fergie mixed with Jesus? That's like exactly what you just did for these guys in their next round. So, yeah.
Well, they're both also super smart. Remember, I had dinner with Patrick and John right before COVID, the Collisons, right before, so it must have been around like January 2020. So right after the holidays, right before COVID. And we were having dinner in downtown San Francisco, and they're talking about Christmas presents. And Patrick was like, yeah, I got John the history of accounting for Christmas. And I started laughing, and they looked at me and they're like, what's so funny? It's great. You should read it. They're just like, they're on another level of like curiosity, and like the history of accounting. Like there's too much to do to go learn about that, but they love it.
I'm glad there are people like that out there in the world doing that stuff.
No, it's a testament to their curiosity about stuff and how they're willing to go, like, there's probably some interesting lessons to learn here, and that's why they've been so successful.
Hey, one thing the Twitter experience makes me think of like you guys, it was interesting where when you were at the helm, went public at a time that you were like the darling among a few other darlings at the time, but high valuation, and I think has been covered with this whole Elon Musk saga of how much value has been created and all of that stuff. Did that change your opinion about when to go public, or how to go public, or expectation setting and going public, or what you can do in the private markets versus public markets? I guess it just makes me think of it talking about the Collisons as well, who are famously kicking the can on going public. Although, again, very happy portfolio company. We love you guys, John and Patrick. If you ever see this clip, I just keep doing your thing.
It's definitely the case that if you're taking a company public for the first time, there's a bunch of things you don't realize that it would be good if people like were more helpful about or more forthcoming about and helped you understand more. For example, there's a ton of things. So if I had it to do over again, I would have definitely spent more time understanding the importance of communicating constantly post-IPO to retail and the sell side. Because if you don't, the people who are short the stock are out there working the journalists constantly, and you're like, just gonna, we'll let the results speak for themselves. But they're out there working the journalists and working retail and working the sell side, and you need to be doing that. CEOs who do that. I remember early on, Benioff, when Salesforce went public, Benioff would go on like Kramer on CNBC and talk about Salesforce, and I remember thinking like, why is he going on CNBC and talking to Jim Cramer about Salesforce. This company's like going to work or not going to work. It's not going to really matter.
Yeah, it's like you're selling B2B. Why, people are going to hire stuff or not.
Super smart. He just got the street and retail investors in the sell side to like, here's my story. I'm going to keep telling a story over and over and over. And it's going to be the same story every quarter. And here's where we're going. This is why I'm doing this. And the people who say this don't understand these other three things that I know that they don't know. And it was super smart and successful and the right thing to do. And I'm constantly advising people, like, don't think when the roadshow is done, you're done spending time with retail investors and reporters and everything.
But you did a good job. I mean, I guess the revenue ultimately caught up you could say it was there was almost too much hype initially behind it, right? And then the revenue has caught up to it. And so in some ways, I guess, would you have, like in doing that, let's say you did that and worked the audience a little bit better there. Do you think the revenue multiple would have held up better throughout that period, and so it would have led to better employee retention? Or like, what would the impact, or would it just your kids wouldn't have had to hear their dad yelled at on television as much as they did, or whatever?
I have no idea. That's the short answer. I think that when it went up to 75, like 2 months after it went public, I was like, this is like insane. The price to revenue ratio is insane. We're even growing 100% year over year. Like we're trading in a multiple now that's, greater than.
It was like what, 75 times or 100 times? Reminiscent of some of these SaaS companies recently, by the way.
Yeah. It was just at a multiple that wasn't, was obviously crazy. I think it was going up like $5 a day while, where it was a holiday break, 2013, like end of December, and was closed around 75 end of the year. I remember getting back beginning January 2014 and sending my assistant, like, man, this is going to be a hard next 6 months. We got a lot of work to do. And the multiples priced to, executing what we've said we're going to do to perfection. And apparently a bunch of things that we don't even know about that we need to do and get started on is better start making money on. So we just, the thing that, again, I would go back to that would be helpful for the company is to have, more than just the advertising line of business and the data business that we started and that we bought and started and is doing quite well now. And a platform business like a Fabric or something else would be great.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. One thing I guess that sort of brings up or makes me think about as well is you were leading a company of which you were not the founder, right? And I think similarly, Jeff Weiner was around the same time doing it for LinkedIn as well. And Eric Schmidt did it for Google with Larry and Sergey still around. But was that challenging in its own right? Because like I sort of think about this now where at Redpoint, right, I inherited things that someone else started. And so I'm perpetually worried when I'm like fucking around on Twitter or something. Am I changing the brand that the founders wanted our firm to have? And therefore, like, it sort of leads to some paralysis if you think about it too much, right? And like a willingness to, hey, I didn't start this thing. And so you feel this John Scully with Apple thing of like, I need to shepherd this rather than take the risks. Did you ever feel that, or were you able to sort of push through it?
I felt like I had to run it the way I would run it. Like I always would tell my managers at Twitter, like, don't pretend to know answers if you don't know the answer. Like the worst thing you can do it's going to create misery for your team is if, they ask you a question or that you need to make some decision and you're acting like you know the answer and you don't know the answer. Just say you don't know the answer, or like, I don't know, or say like, I don't know, let's talk about it. What do you guys think we should do? Like when you try to be someone you're not, or know something you don't know, or act like something that you don't understand, it just creates misery for everybody because everyone sees right through it. So I felt like I had to run the company the way I was going to run the company, and that was different than the way probably anyone else would run the company, and that didn't bother me at all. But I always knew I'm not the founder of this product. Like, Ev and Jack and Biz are the founders of the product, and they'll always be the founders of Twitter. I'm going to be the CEO of Twitter for like 5-6 years. And then there'll be someone else turned out to be Jack, but then someone else will be the CEO, but you guys are always going to be the founders of the company. So, and when you speak to the employees, and I tried to have them speak, frequently, come and talk to the team frequently. They were on stage with me in New York and in front of the company in San Francisco the night of the IPO. I wanted them there, like, this is your company. I'm running it right now, but it's your company. You created it. You got to get on, you got to get up here and talk to the team. Because you guys speak with the fluence, the fluency of the founders of the company. And that actually helped me a ton also in my personal life, because I would get, when I was running Twitter, like, you'd get invited to things that you wouldn't get invited to if you weren't CEO of Twitter. I remember I got invited to the Oscars one year, and I was like, I'm not going to go. And my daughter was like, what do you mean? You got to go. Like, I want to go to things I'm invited to because I'm Dick Costolo, not because I'm the CEO of Twitter, because eventually I'm not going to be the CEO of Twitter. And I don't want to like hold on to the job so that I get in, because if I don't have the job anymore, I won't get to go to the Oscars. So I'm just not going to go to things that the CEO of Twitter is invited to. I'm going to go to things that Dick Costolo is invited to.
Did you pass on going to the Oscars?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I passed on a bunch of stuff.
I don't know if I philosophically hear and agree with what you're talking about. I think the Oscars, I would.
Well, I didn't pass on the Super Bowl invitation from the NFL. I pretended that was for Dick Costolo.
Yeah. This was sent to
Dick Costolo in the chair. It didn't say CEO of Twitter.
Yeah, that's right. That's interesting.
But I just mean, generally speaking, I tried not to get my identity too wrapped up into the role.
Yeah.
That's how these things start to go. That's how these people start to go off the rails.
Totally. And that's where ego starts to play.
Yeah. You're like the smartest guy in the room. It says right here on this invitation.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And then everyone, because that's one of the things when I switched, I was at a boutique investment bank that a lot of people hadn't heard of at the time. And it's a boutique investment bank. So you're doing sell side advisory. And so most of the time people haven't heard of you. It's end of life service because you're giving advice, right? At the end of selling a company. And then I switched over to VC, and like suddenly I was funnier and smarter and like more entertaining. And all I did was switch my domain address. Like all it was, went from Logan to Logan at the VC firm. And it's amazing. Like everyone treated me, my jokes were better, and I was far smarter and all that. And being cognizant of that fact of like what your role is versus who you are, I feel like that could lead, if you're not careful, it can lead to you going crazy.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that Bill Campbell was a mentor of yours, who I've always been fascinated by. For people that don't know, Bill Campbell's like the consummate, I think, CEO coach, right? I mean, he coached Steve Jobs and Eric Schmidt and Larry and Sergey. And I don't know, you probably know the list better than I do at this point. But basically everyone that was important from, some point in the Silicon Valley to today-ish, right? He was kind of, and recently passed away a couple of years ago. Is that right?
He passed away a few years ago.
Yeah.
He was an executive vice president at Apple. And then when they spun Claris software out of Apple, Bill became CEO of Claris. And that's going a ways back, obviously.
Yeah.
He was, in the 2000s, he was on the board of Apple. He was Steve's friend, Steve Jobs' friend, but also on the board of Apple. And then he was Eric, Larry, and Sergey's coach at Google. I think John Doerr Kleiner had brought him in there. He was at Twitter when I got there, and he was working with us and the executive team at Twitter. Bill was called Coach Campbell, but he was called Coach because he had been the coach of the Columbia football team. So he wasn't an executive coach in the traditional sense of psychologist, or, lie down on the couch and tell me, why you hate your board. He was more of a management practices and leadership and don't tell people what to do. Stop making all the decisions. I remember my first sort of staff meeting, my direct reports as CEO. It's like, we got to like really work on the cadence of how the company, how fast the company is moving and pace of execution and everything. And made a bunch of decisions in the meeting and got out and thought it was super impressed with myself. And I was like, what did you think? And Campbell goes, stop making all the decisions. I was like, what? He's like, let me tell you a story. When I became CEO of Claris, Donna Dubinsky, who had left an EVP role at Apple, came with me. And after the first 2 weeks I was CEO at Claris, she came up to me and said, hey, Bill, if you're going to keep making all the decisions, I'm going to go back to Apple and you can hire someone you have to pay a lot less money to do my job. He's like, don't tell people what to do. It's just give them ownership of the problem and create the solution for themselves. Otherwise, you're going to be a bottleneck for everything. And if the thing that you tell them to do doesn't work, they're just going to sit there and wait for you to tell them to do what next instead of figure out what the solution is. And, push decisions down the stack and only make the decisions that only the CEO can make. He was just great at that kind of stuff. He's no nonsense. He swore all the time, which I found hilarious. He was constantly swearing.
Maybe that's why I've heard Lorne Michaels doesn't like that on interview.
He doesn't like it at all. And one of the funniest going back to Saturday Night Live, one of the funniest auditions in Saturday Night Live history, who I will not name to protect the guilty, was crushing it in his SNL audition, and had the audience, including Lorne, in stitches, and then came out and did a third monologue, of Rush as impersonating Rush Limbaugh, but swearing constantly. And that was it for him. Never got called back.
Is this person famous today? Or?
Meh.
Yeah, got it. Wow. So Bill Campbell not going to be on SNL. Wow. What was it just an intuition of how to read people and how to like,
strangely, I say strangely because it was non-obvious that he was like this. He was strangely high EQ. Like he would tell you something about, he would come in after talking to someone on my team for a half hour and I would say like, a person's, amazing, right? They're great at blah, 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 blah. And he would say, yeah, but they're this adjective. And I would go like, man, I don't see that. He's like, yeah. At some point, you'll see it. I think it's going to cause a problem a little bit down the road. And then like literally 3 years later, that exact thing would blow up. And that happened on 2 or 3 occasions. So it was just, it's one of those people that's super high EQ. And the thing about Bill is he liked to actually sit in on all the meetings, but also would kind of like armchair quarterback from the back, which bugged me. He would like, I'll sit on management team meetings now, but I literally say like, I'm just going to sit in the back of the room and observe and take notes, just trying to help you guys create more efficient meetings. I'm not going to say anything. Please don't look at me and ask me questions. That was not Bill. Bill would like go, if he liked something someone said, he would golf clap. He'd be like sitting there trying to run the meeting going, oh God. It wasn't all wine and roses. There was some like, hey, can you not clap when people
or not call that person a fucking idiot or whatever. Yeah, as the case may be. No, and he gave some interesting advice, and I know there's been a book written about him on like some of the advice that he's given or leadership lessons and all that. But I think he gave you some specific advice on how to give bad feedback to people, and then also I don't know if this is him, but the 2x2 matrix of communication.
Well, the 2x2 thing is Kim Scott, who wrote the book Radical Candor, and I did all that. Now, Bill was like Bill's whole thing was really forthright communication. Like, don't tell people don't manage by trying to be liked. Managing by trying to be liked is just going to create misery and is the path to ruin. Doesn't mean you have to be an asshole. Doesn't mean you have to be a jerk, but like, don't tell, Logan A and then tell Matt A prime, don't tell Logan like, hey, Logan, I went into that meeting with the CEO and, was able to get you that pancake you wanted, congratulations. You get to have the pancake out there, and then go tell Matt, nobody wanted you to have that pancake more than me. Hopefully next time. People go out and talk, and obviously is a stupid example, but this happens all the time. Someone comes in and like, hey, I don't want to work on internal tools anymore. I want to build a new feature. I want to build user features. And like, if I can't work on user features, I'm going to quit, and instead of saying like, hey man, internal tools are literally the highest leverage thing anyone in the company can be working on. It makes all the engineers, more productive. It's the most important thing to work on the company. Instead, they say stuff like, just keep doing it for whatever, some version of, look, just do it a little more longer and then I'll go talk to Dick, or, everyone needs to rotate through this, maybe just another 8 weeks and then I'll try to get you on the so-and-so team. Just doing stuff like that just creates, then people end up quitting anyway and just creates misery.
Yeah, I think the specific thing I think I credited to him in listening back, but was when giving bad feedback, just have it written down exactly.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. He did tell me that, and it's great advice. Bad feedback or worse, like write down what you're going to say and make those words come out of your mouth, right? It's true. He was like, when I had to give really negative feedback, I would write it down a few days before when the meeting wasn't like an hour from now. And then I would sit down with the person and make myself say exactly those words, and so that we're communicating as forthrightly as possible.
One of my friends was a CRO of a company and has had to fire so many people over the years, right? Just like that's kind of the job when you manage lots of salespeople. And I was like, how do you do that emotionally? Like, how do you deal with this? And he was like, listen, Logan, the first thing I do is I tell him that we're going to have a hard conversation. And then I get the words out of my mouth. You're going to be moving on. And it was like, once you say that, then you just read the script and say whatever you want. They're not going to hear anything else. Like once you get through that, you're kind of in the clear because they'll be thinking about their family or the next steps or what they're going to punch you in the face or whatever they're thinking, but they're not thinking about exactly delivering the message. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like just get those words out of your mouth, which is so hard, especially I think inherently I have a bias to like try to be, friendly and try to get through a conversation and sort of antagonize people. Whereas I have friends, a co-host on this podcast occasionally, Zach Weinberg, who's much more willing to be an antagonist to people. And it just, stylistically, you got to sort of know yourself in dealing with people and giving feedback and all that stuff.
Yeah. I remember I had to let somebody go with global operating responsibility. So I was like, wait a minute. I'm like, people in Tokyo are going to be asleep, and people in Europe, it'll be night. If I do it at night, the people in Europe will be asleep. The people in Tokyo, I'm just like trying to figure out, okay, I have to like let this person go. And then there has to be a communication sort of waterfall of who tells who what. And David Rosenblatt on my board, who had been the CEO of DoubleClick and is now the CEO of First Dibs, is like, oh, I had to do that. I actually had a schedule that a half hour by a half hour schedule for the day of what went down. I can send it to you. It might be helpful. I was like, oh, it's great. Yeah, please do. And the only thing I remember about the schedule is it said, 6:30 a.m., wake up in a cold sweat. And I remember thinking like, it's so helpful to see that and just realize, oh, I'm not the only one who's like, this is just absolutely, if you can't tell the person you're firing, this is hard for me too. You can't do that.
Totally.
Like horrible. But it's just horrible. It's like the worst day. And you're like, oh God, this is just sucks. And I think people don't realize, some people don't realize like it's hard for everybody. You just have to fight through it and realize it's going to be a bad day.
One thing that I've heard you talk about as well, and I texted back and forth with Ryan Sarber this morning before you were coming on, just about like his experience working with you and Twitter and all that. And he gave you a ton of credit for up-leveling the management style within the company and just how professionally Twitter actually operated. And I think you taught a class internally or something.
Yeah, I did. Ben Horowitz had a class at Cloudflare managing it. Not Cloudflare, geez, Cloudflare's Ben Horowitz from Andreessen Horowitz.
I don't know.
Don't know him?
Never heard of the guy.
Never heard of him? Maybe it's a different Ben Horowitz.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Ben had a class called Managing a Loud Cloud, and I was like, "That's a great idea. I'm going to do that." And what happened was, I had this engineer come up to me, and he's like, "Should we have one-on-ones with our manager at Twitter or not?" And I said, "Well, I mean, I have one-on-ones with my directs, but why are you asking?" And he kind of asked it in this very pointed way. And he said, well, it was on the ads team. And on the ads team, we have one-on-ones with our engineering managers. And I just transferred to platform engineering, and platform engineering says we don't have one-on-ones at Twitter. Anyway, that was a real eye-opener for me because I began to realize that everybody managed based on wherever they had just come from. If you'd come from eBay, you did this. If you came from Google, you did that. If you came from Facebook, you did this other thing. So I built this managing a Twitter class, and it was about 6 hours long. And it was, communicating, decision making, not managing by trying to be liked, making sure everybody understands what you understand, make sure everybody has the context for decisions that are made. Doesn't mean it doesn't mean it's a Freedom of Information Act. You don't have to read a transcription of the meeting that happened, but help people understand, hey, it was a tough decision as to whether to do A or B. And, we talked about it for a while and decided to do this for these reasons. That's just make sure everybody understands what you understand. Then people are walking around knowing how to be successful in their roles, knowing how to be productive in their work, and then knowing what that success means for both them and the company. And that's hugely valuable. I think Ben said basically the same things in his outline. I just changed the contents of it mostly to be stuff that was relevant to stuff we were doing on Twitter. Improving your team, making your team better. Also a bunch of the stuff we've talked about. Like, don't try to it's not your job as a manager to be omniscient. People think they get promoted to manager and then have to have all the answers. Like, again, you think you're going to spit, if you're spitting people and you think they don't notice, you're mistaken.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to credit you with it for forever henceforth. The Dick Costolo model of this versus that Ben guy, whoever that was.
All right. Fine.
What are the other things you said? What about Marxist versus Darwinian management? I thought that was such an interesting mindset because it's inherently. I think the gravitational pull would be towards more Marxist management of people, but actually what you want to do in a company is more Darwinian management. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's not dissimilar to investing. A Marxist management style is like, well, these three people are lagging behind. You need to go spend time with them and help them catch up to the other kids and make sure they're, to each. Marxist method of management is to each according to his needs, and going and spending time with your sub performers to try to elevate them and get them to be as, up to some adequate level of performance. Well, what you want to do is improve the entire team. And the way to improve your entire team is to invest in the people who are performing. Invest time and energy and effort into the people who are performing and make them help them make themselves even better and help make them even better. And that's how your whole team gets better. I think good investors would tell you the same thing about their portfolio. Man, I got to spend time with my winners and understand what we can be doing to help them do more and what I can be doing to help them do better, and try to spend time with the one who's really lagging back here and limping along and barely going to make it to the, halfway mark is just not going to get me anywhere and not going to be what delivers returns to my investors.
Definitely. I mean, it's one of those things you feel inherently.
Sorry, I'm interrupting you, but that's not naturally the way things will go, right? Your top performers are like, I don't need any help, I'm kicking ass. And your poor performers are like, want to talk to you every 2 hours. So you got to just, you have to don't necessarily just be in reaction to who wants to spend time with you, but be much more active about spending time with the top performers and making sure they're getting what they need, even if they don't need time with you.
I use as an analogy, I'll always bitch about Kanban boards or Asana or Trello or Smartsheet or Monday.com or whatever, because for the most part, and I'm sure there's ways you can figure this out, but for the most part, the to-do item shows up in the same text size and the same font and the same screen size it's taking up, when the prioritization of how you should spend your time is ultimately wildly disproportionate, right? of what those tasks are. And so I have people internally at times will use these things to track, and it's well, that's fine, but we should actually resize this one thing to take up the entire screen, right? And all these other things should exist in a very small line across the bottom, because that's how you should prioritize your time. And again, when you work in these task management systems, I totally get why. I mean, they serve a really good purpose, but if you're too indexed to just knocking off tasks, you're going to lose sight at times of what's actually impactful or important to your job.
Yeah, 100%, totally agree.
Now, what about, I know you're not managing a big company at scale, but one of the things you've got yourself in, I don't know if trouble's the right word, but culture and managing, your whole self and all of that stuff. We don't need to rehash the specifics of that. But how do you think about, obviously you don't have to run a company today, and dealing with people and their political or religious or ideological views and all of that stuff in the discourse, but you coach companies. How do you think about that?
There's going to be more of it, but there was a bunch of that when I was at Twitter. I used to tell the company the following things. You have to assume that your coworkers are working in the best interest of the company. I want you to always assume, start with the assumption that whether someone did something stupid or smart or whatever, always assume that your coworkers have the best interest, are trying to do the right thing for the company and have the best interest of the company at heart. I remember there's there's one David Foster Wallace commencement speech, but he talks about like being in a car behind someone at a red light and the light turns green and people just start laying on the horn. It's like, why do people just assume the person, what if the person had a heart attack? But people just when they don't know the person in the car in front of them, they immediately assume the worst. Like, that asshole, go! Meanwhile, if I was behind you and we're like driving a group of people somewhere and I'm behind you at a red light and the light turns green and you don't go anywhere, I'm probably thinking like, uh-oh, what's going on with Logan? And so it was specific to like, hey, if you're in engineering and you're like, what are those salespeople doing? The salespeople are working hard. You think it's fun to like, I don't know, you have to go, sit in a meeting with this consumer brand for 9 hours and pitch them 9 different ideas about things they can do on the platform and get yelled at about how some porn tweet showed up behind the Egg McMuffin yesterday. Like, it's not fun. Do you want to go sit in the meeting and listen to that and get, and then take notes and say you're going to come back and talk to me about it? And, and then the same goes. And then the salespeople are like, when are the engineers going to fix these bugs? Like, which one of the 10,000 are you referring to? So I would get up in front of the company and say, you have to assume that your colleagues that you don't know have the best interest of the company at heart, just as you assume that about the people you work next to every day. Insist that and so I'm not going to tolerate like anonymous questions anymore in the all hands meeting that assume in the question that the people in, organization X are doing something nefarious. And then secondly, I just tell them, and this is obviously specific to companies, don't weaponize the core values. Every companies have core values. We had a bunch we worked on for a while to help us make decisions. And I wanted them to be things that actually we looked to help us make decisions, not stupid, like, I don't know, you get on airlines and they're like, here at United, we value honesty, integrity. Like, okay, big. So what? That doesn't tell me anything. Like, who doesn't value? Like, anyway, don't weaponize those. You hear more and more CEOs going, oh my God, we've got the core value, blah. And people use it as a hammer to, hit me on the head at all hands meetings with it. And I would just tell the team, like, don't weaponize, you can't weaponize the core values or the mission of the company against me or other people.
Yeah, it's interesting. The one that I struggle with, or I've seen, I'm glad there's different people running these experiments at scale, like Brian Armstrong doing what he's doing, or Toby Lukey doing what he's doing, and all these different styles of approaching some of the less on the assuming best intent around your employees with regard to their job, but from a cultural standpoint, I do think that this whole, like, I'm just seeing it manifest itself in all my companies in some way, shape, or form, right? And it's always it's some small group that starts some Slack channel that galvanizes behind some person or cause or something, right? That always rears its head. And so I understand where people are coming from in their frustrations with this.
Yeah, as you know, though, the problem is, and as every CEO knows, the problem is there's always a next thing you're not doing. So once you start allowing people to weaponize that, and well, what are you going to do about this? Like, I'm not on the witness stand. We're running it. It doesn't. However, I will say that where I wildly diverge from some of the others you just talked about is I don't think that means you shouldn't talk about, stuff at work. Like work is literally one of the last places in America where you can have like actual discourse where people who think differently about things are in the same room talking to each other. So I don't think it's particularly healthy to say this is, you can't talk about that stuff here, because I think it's probably the last place we can talk about that stuff. I just think that, weaponizing it or putting leadership on the witness stand or putting a colleague on the witness stand, there's always another thing you're not doing. Doesn't mean you're not trying to do the best you can. But you can always weaponize another, there's always another, well, what about X?
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
That's just true.
Yeah, totally. No, it makes a lot of sense. I guess one of the anecdotes, the elephant in the room, literally right now, with regard to your prior business, is someone that no longer follows you on Twitter. And I had heard you tell a story of Elon Musk, maybe his decision to unfollow you.
It was when I got in from the company and tell look, I'm going to step down. Been doing this for 6.5 years. It's time for, it's not my company. I'm not the founder one of the founders of the company. Jack's going to come back and run the company. I was up in front of the company telling them that at a sort of an all hands meeting. I said, I'm going to stay on the board. And I quickly realized, by the way, 3 months later, staying on the board when someone else is now CEO is a stupid thing to do, because I'm sitting in the room and Jack's got to be able to run the company the way he wants to run it. And he can't look across the table and go, that moron didn't screw this up. So I was like, I got it. So after that meeting, I was like, I got to get out of here. This is just a horrible idea. So I resigned from the board as well. But anyway, when I was up in front of the company telling them I was resigning, I got off stage right afterwards. And, I had these internal dashboards that tell you, followers and unfollowers and stuff. And I looked at my phone, million text messages, of course, because people were tweeting what was happening. And then the dashboard alert was Elon Musk has unfollowed you on Twitter. I was like, wow, that was a half an hour. It was pretty quick.
I'll tell you what, he was not following Dick Costolo. He was following the CEO of Twitter.
Thank you.
That's the lesson in all this.
Good callback.
Do you have any, I'm sure you have a million opinions about all the stuff that's going on right now, but any, do you think he ever wanted to buy the company and has sort of accidentally found himself in a situation he doesn't want to end up in, or any perspective on that?
I kind of do, but I have no idea whether I kind of feel like that's where we are, because it seems like that's the way he's acting, but I don't really have any idea whether that's true or not. But it feels like where we are. The thing that's weird is when you see Elon in a small group setting and people ask him questions, he responds in this thoughtful way that makes you realize, God, this guy's like really thoughtful and crazy smart, and his ability to think at another level about these things is amazing. And then he's kind of a totally different person on Twitter, responding with the poop emoji to the CEO of Twitter. So it's strange. It's just weird, dissonance to know this person's really thoughtful and a careful thinker and super, super smart. And then, but seems to obviously gets a kick out of poking around the edges on Twitter. And, I've talked to people who say, who know him a lot better than I do, or I think he's testing the boundaries. He's trying to see how far he can push here and there. And it's just a strange juxtaposition of the person you see in private versus the person you see on Twitter. The person who I feel badly for is Parag, who woke up as CEO of the company in his first CEO role and is dealing with one of the weirdest situations in corporate America in the last 100 years.
First full day as Twitter CEO tomorrow. Yeah, there's something.
Yeah, wow. Talk about right into the fire.
Yeah, and then the whole, you don't need a comment, but the whole Jack situation's a fascinating one where I don't even really know what's going on at this point. I sort of just want it to end and move on. I have a feeling that's probably where it's headed, is some very large fine and everyone goes their separate ways. But
feels like that's probably what happens. But it's hard. It's hard. They can't. It does anyway. It's hard. Who knows? We'll see.
was it Ev that tweeted out like, "Hey, can we all just move on from this situation?"
Yes.
Which is hard because that's not like the fiduciary. Like,
Of course, the answer is you can't, because the board has a fiduciary duty to accept this offer that's much, much higher than where the stock was trading. And if they didn't accept that offer, then they would be subject to these insane shareholder lawsuits that they would get sued for immediately. And then they would be the ones paying some huge fine for not accepting an offer that was, 35%, 40%, 50% above where the stock was trading. So they had to do that.
they have to, yeah. No, they have to run it to ground. And now there's the whole Mudge FTC thing, which I'm sure, I mean, that's, a whole nother thing, but
Yeah. I've never met that person. Jack, I believe, hired him. But one of the things in there that was weird to me, I read that whole thing. One of the things in there that was like, again, I don't know anything about the facts of any of this stuff, but I do know that, like, when the country of India or Pakistan or whatever would say, hey, you need to, like, give us this person's phone number, or, take down these tweets, we would say, and it wasn't necessarily a specific law. It was just something the prime minister wanted. We would say no. So I have a hard time believing that while we wouldn't delete a tweet the prime minister wants deleted, we would hire one of his spies to come work in the company. It just strikes me as like, that's not possibly true.
yeah, never a dull moment, it seems, though, for the business. Well, I have some quick hitters here. Let's see how fast we can do them. And then I'll get you out of here. Edit button.
It's much more complicated than people think, but you could have a short turnaround on it. I think the half-hour turnaround on it is probably a good idea. You have to go delete all the retweets and blah, blah, blah after that, though.
Yeah, did you ever think you would see the day the edit button would come to Twitter?
Yeah, you can do an edit button. You just have to you have to have a time window on it. And then, like, you have to go delete anyone who's retweeted it and everything, because obviously they're retweeting something different now.
Yeah. Silicon Valley, the show.
Oh, what a blast. My favorite thing about Silicon Valley, the show, when I was in the writer's room there, was they thought it was endlessly funny that they would come up and interview companies and CEOs in Silicon Valley. And they would go, why is it important to be working here at, I don't know, pick the company, Yelp.
Yeah.
I'm making it up just because I thought of it.
Redpoint.
Because, because we're changing the world. We're changing the way people see and interact with their community and the way people are able to deal with local businesses. Okay. Go up to the next floor, Pinterest. Why is it important to work here at Pinterest? We're changing the world. I'm picking on Pinterest and Yelp. The writers were like, you guys realize that you all say that, right? Like, don't you, that every company we go to says they're changing the world, when in fact what you're doing is paying, so they literally, in I think it was season 3 or season 4, have Richard temporarily go to work for this company where they're painting virtual mustaches on people. That's the app. And they're like, Richard, we're changing the world. We're changing the way people see each other. Anyway, they just thought that was hilarious, and they weren't wrong.
You got to get people to buy into the corporate mission and all that stuff, because otherwise, what are we doing here on this earth?
The other great thing about Silicon Valley is the people that think that someone in the show is them.
Oh, totally.
That's not. And they would get that all the time. Like, this is obviously so-and-so. It's not so-and-so. It is based on somebody. It's based on this other person. No. It's based on so-and-so. Okay, well, I've seen the headshot of the person it is based on in the writer's room, but they'll be happy to know it's based on you instead.
Yeah, well, you'll send me the full list after, right? Of that's the VIP thing. What about TikTok and Vine? Do you see TikTok success and you think God bless them, or do you think, like, gosh, Vine should have been that in some way? What's your sentiment on those two?
I mean, lots of things are there first and then don't end up being the winner. I see TikTok success and I say, God bless them. I wish, Vine had gone on to have the opportunity to do a bunch of that stuff. But TikTok's algorithm obviously is the algorithm that got going there works. Again, the thing about algorithms is it works until it becomes sometimes, well, we've all seen what happens with these algorithms. They work until they just become this echo chamber of the same stuff. You're seeing the same stuff over and over and over.
Yeah, be careful what you wish for. Well, that's all I have. Dick, thanks for doing this. This was super entertaining. I feel like in an amount of time we played all the hits, and I appreciate you graciously playing back some of the stuff that I had heard you talk about in the past, but it was fun.
Happy to do it. Yeah, it was fun. Thanks, Logan. Appreciate it.